Yeah, it's no surprise to anyone right now that over the past month, we've had a war between the USA and Iran. And the bad thing about this war isn't the fact that two nations are fighting, because obviously war is a bad thing. Everyone knows how dramatic and how much loss every nation that's involved in a war ends up. So with not just the loss of life, the death toll going up, probably thousands in Iran especially, and US facing some few casualties, especially from US soldiers. It's hard to say to minimize the damage this war will cause, not just in Europe, the Middle East, America, but also for us here in Africa, because the Strait of Hormuz closing isn't something that will affect just the Europeans. It won't affect just the Americans. It will affect us very badly. And in this video, I want to take a closer look at the countries that may end up facing this, really facing this, by the way, because there are things many people don't take into consideration. And most people tend to say, yeah, we understand Iran should collect a toll on every ship going through the strait. Are you sure that is a good idea? So before we get into it, I want to thank you for being around, and feel free to hit the like, subscribe button, leave a comment on if you think I may have missed a nation and all the things you think I should have talked about. But if not, let me know what you think about the show, by the way. So let's get right into it. So our story for today is mostly about the Strait of Hormuz and how much this war between two colossal nations will affect Africa. So first and foremost, ever since February the 28th, when the USA and Israel launched an unprovoked attack on Iran, it's been really clear that Iran has been asked, or they have received the highest loss in terms of casualty. But in terms of reputation, the US really has faced the real damn loss, because it's now been showing, and most countries have been looking at it saying, but wait, wasn't this the US we were so afraid of? Isn't this the very US that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Isn't this the very US that during their intervention were able to get the Second World War get to a close? Isn't this the very US that were able to take down several nations during different wars, help um, dispatch several invasions? What's happening? And actually, it's clear that the US, while getting into this kind of a war, never thought Iran would be able to stand right up to today and be able to do what they have been able to do. But forgetting all of that, the US also never really thought that Iran, for over all these years, over 40 years of the Ayatollah being the head of the government, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, which was later killed during the beginning of this war, during over 40 years, they never thought he has been preparing for a counter. He knew this day was coming after watching many of his neighbors being taken down, after watching Saddam Hussein, after watching Muammar Gaddafi, and many other neighbors, after watching even Fidel Castro in Cuba. He already understood something was coming for him. So over all this period, all these 40 years, he devoted himself not just in to saving the people, which I don't know, because the Iranian diaspora talked of the Ayatollah being very bad, that only have around 10% of the population support him. Iranian diaspora and experts, they say such things, but I don't actually know what is true, what is false. So I'm not here to talk about how that government takes care of its people. If the people need liberation, they should do it themselves. I'm all for every single nation should liberate itself by themselves, because we've seen that in many nations where when someone else comes in as liberator, it ends up really bad. Libya can testify, the Libyan people can really testify about that. But so we've seen how much the Iranian regime could withstand strikes and bombs on almost daily basis from not just the USA but also from Israel, and they were able to retaliate. But not just retaliate on Israel or the US, but retaliate into also they were able to retaliate on their neighbors, most of their neighbors in the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, nations like Qatar, First State, Oman, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf nations really, and even Bahrain, they all had strikes coming from Iran as a retaliation from what may have happened. But as we may all know, Iran's greatest move was to close the Strait of Hormuz. The strait that's responsible of over 50% of the world shipping. So imagine 50% of the world's oil passing through that strait has been closed and is now being controlled by the Iranian government. You understand how much power and influence that government will have. They're the ones now to say, nah, we ain't doing that shit. We decide who is passing and who is not. So you understand how much influence they have. This is not only on the global economy. This is increasing their sphere of influence. And now the question is, who suffers? Who suffers as of now? Actually, if you ask me, everyone suffers. Right up to even Iran, who is blocking the strait, everyone suffers because if the Strait of Hormuz is being blocked, that blockade isn't just stopping countries needing the oil and the fertilizer and any other good going through that strait, but it's also stopping countries selling those goods outside. So you understand, if Iran is able to produce, let's say, 100 barrels of oil in a day, let's just say something of that sort, they are able to produce 100 barrels of oil. Now they are not able to sell that 100 barrels of oil because they blockaded the Strait of Hormuz. How are they gaining? Aside from the fact that they are also blockading oil from um, Qatar or the UAE or Saudi Arabia. You see now that everyone is losing from this. The global economy is being strangled. But here's the thing: Iran has decided to open up the Strait of Hormuz, but open up the strait in some condition. The condition being that every ship going through that strait, every ship, in the exception of the US and kind of the US allied ships going through the Strait of Hormuz, has to pay a toll of $2 million, and that $2 million will be paid not cash, but will be paid through crypto, where it's untraceable, or they pay $1 a barrel of oil. So you understand that this is making Iran richer. And the problem with this now is we don't know if this will get to an end. Is it something of a sort of Iran will do this just for 2 months? Or is it more of something that Iran is just doing this? We don't know when they are stopping. Because if it's something where there is no end to it, I would actually say it's really bad for the world economy. The Strait of Hormuz was open freely for everyone before. Now, after the US and Israel attack, Iran is now strangling the world economy and holding everyone hostage. Now, while even if the strait reopens and Iran controls it, we now understand that oil and fertilizer or anything going through the strait will normally become more expensive. Because if a ship was going through the strait while paying nothing to no one except paying for what they are importing, now they are forced to give an additional $2 million just to cross the strait. You understand that That $2 million will have to factor in, and consumers will be the ones to face it. That's just plain and simple. We are the ones to feel the pain and not the government. So, yes, what I really want to talk about. What I really want to talk about is the fact that it will be very wrong for anyone thinking, yeah, that's right. If Iran gets the Strait of Hormuz, they control it. It's a good thing. There's nothing good about it because if this gets to be the normal, or if this gets to be how things work now, this will encourage not just them, but not just Iran, but many other countries that have strait. Because I believe there's a strait in Turkey. What if the Turkish government tend to have some issues with, let's say, the USA? Because knowing what's happening between Turkey and Israel, if they get into a real quarrel that may start a war, the US may end up backing Israel, which will make Turkey also say, but what? What's happening? Let's block the strait. You understand that that will be a strangle again, and they may also start taking a toll. What if there's another strait in Asia? I think in the Philippines. I think it's in the Philippines. If I'm mistaken, you may correct me down in the comments. But there's another strait that may end up being blocked too. Who knows? Like you see, this is setting a precedent that actually doesn't even make sense. The other strait in between the Horn of Africa, Bab al Mandab, if it's close to the strait connecting the Gulf of Eden and I think the Red Sea, if it's close to, another big problem. You understand? This is setting a very bad precedent. All this because of the US and Israel's reckless actions. If you may say, but Egypt they collect money on the Suez Canal. What of Panama? They collect money on the Panama Canal. That's true, but you should also remember those are canals and not straits. Those are not natural water sources. Those were man-made so as to ease shipping into other nations. So the Suez Canal in Egypt, actually, they need to pay the Egyptian government because maintaining it isn't like just a daily job. And that's part of the Egyptian government's land that was used to create such a path for other nations to pass. So you understand that canals and straits are two different things. We can't compare those two bodies of water. So now let's move now to the countries that will really face this in Africa. There are many of them, and just to give a few, we'll actually just take a look at those who may really feel this in their heart, deep in. First, Kenya. Kenya. Kenya gets 100% of its fuel from the Strait of Hormuz. Like, wait, what? 100%. So if the strait is being shut down for, let's say, 3 4 months, the Kenyan economy will completely get strangled. They may get into some horrible debts. If 100%, according to um, different sources, but yes, like one of my sources, I think, yeah, one of my sources says 100% of Kenyan oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, and mostly it's from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. You understand how much they depend on it, and not Kenya alone, but also Ethiopia, Zambia, Uganda. Those are the countries that are mostly dependent, but just Kenya and Ethiopia, just those two, their economy may really fall down if the strait gets closed for, let's say, 6 months, because 6 months period is just horrible. But that's not the only problem. You know, if you've taken a look at it, most of these countries are in East Africa. They are very dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. What of countries in, let's say, West Africa, let's say South Africa, how those countries, or even North Africa, mostly North African countries are kind of good, kind of. because there's oil. Most of them have oil, or they are somehow close to the nations with oil, that they don't really depend on the Strait of Hormuz, most of them. But the other nations in Africa that may feel impacted will not forcefully be because of oil, but because of fertilizer. Aside from oil being passed through the Strait of Hormuz, fertilizer is another big thing that goes through that strait. And if there is no fertilizer, there's actually, I would not say no food, but less food, that may cause starvation in countries that already have a real high rate of starvation. People are really malnourished in most countries in Africa. We know that. We know that. And we won't lie to ourselves saying we have, they are excessive. There are kind of excess food in some nations. But now, what if there's no fertilizer to even increase the production of some of the grains we mostly consume that much in Africa? So some of the nations that may really face this due to mostly, let's say, due to fertilizer import, we'll have guys like Nigeria. Nigeria will really face it due to fertilizer. Egypt too, and Algeria, Morocco, all these guys mostly fertilizer. Some few nations, that's not that bad. I'm not minimizing the amount of pain and mostly economic and um, human suffering that may be undergone after this. I'm not minimizing that. I'm just saying what I mean. It's not that bad. I mean the amount of nations aren't that much out of um out of our 50 nations. That's 55 to be exact. Not up to 10 will feel it at that level where it may really affect their economy that much. Some will really feel it. Kenya and Ethiopia for real. Those niggas will, they may really feel the pain, but other nations not that much. And so I guess we can only look at it and say, oh, if your nation is not part of it, you should be grateful. But also, island nations will face it, by the way. When I mean island nations, I'm taking a look at the Seychelles, I'm taking a look at Mauritius, and also Madagascar. Those guys depend so much on the Strait of Hormuz. So those nations will feel it too. But those nations aren't that populated when compared to especially Ethiopia and Kenya. So that's it. Talking of all of this, if I may, thinking of it, I don't really think though there's a great solution as of right now for this issue. My only advice will be try to store as much food as you can while this still goes on. Because even after the ceasefire, there are some rumors, and looking at how things are going, the wind blows more in the direction of more war. Who knows? Probably in the next few days, we may have some resumption of hostilities between the US and Iran. So the only thing I can say is try to just keep an open heart, store as much food as you can, and let's just hope for the best. That's it for me today, and feel free to like, subscribe, and let me know what you think of the show. Let me know which nation you think I may have forgotten, and if your nation is really impacted, tell me, are you already feeling the economic pain, or if not, do you think this may actually impact you, or is it just those are just data which doesn't reflect the reality on the ground? Let me know in the comment, and I'll meet you next time. Thanks for being around and sticking to the end. See you next time. Cheers.